Hello, my name is Travis Pfeiffer. I am from the SUNY College of Optometry. The presentation today is called I Can Read the Line, but It's Still Blurry, Understanding Vision Through Aberrometry. We're going to be talking a lot about aberrations, really how we get to this complaint that we often hear our patients. Before I go too much further, I have no relevant financial disclosures, and just dive right in. So aberrations, it's a name that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? I did what any good academic does, and I took it to Google first to see what the result was, and I included that here. Um, I found this a little bit funny, particularly the second definition here, where an aberration can be regarded as someone or something that is typically seen as atypical and therefore able to be discounted. Or I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation, you'll be in agreement with me. We can't just ignore these aberrations. We can't discount these aberrations. The patient really deserve better than to be dealing with them, and they deserve better vision than they. So, what are aberrations really? Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I've included one. And if you look at this photo, this is something that a lot of our patients deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, if you look at the headlights in the back, you'll see something more in regards to streaking. They all seem to be streaking in one direction that repeated amongst them. You look closer to the headlights closer to us on the car's foreground, and you'll see more of a halo effect, more oblong glare effect. If you look at the lights in the sky, you'll see more of a wide halo. It's definitely a lot of light spreading out over a large distance. Patients aren't going to be thrilled with this quality of vision on a day-to-day basis. Um, I had a patient that I was seeing in SUNY contact lens clinics, and I was working with a fourth year intern, and he came to me and he said, I just don't understand what's going on. Walk through the case. The patient was 20/80 best corrected in their glasses. Um, and with a first time scleral lens, they improved to 20 on the Snellen visual acuity chart. The student was ecstatic because they'd seen such a massive improvement in acuity just by putting a lens on, but they were they were unsure of how the patient was actually feeling because the patient told them, not actually happy with my vision. The intern probed a little bit further. The patient said, it's just not as sharp as it used to be in my glasses. The intern compared the two lines and the sizes, and the patient said, I get that, but it's just not as sharp. So I told the intern to go back in and ask him, what about it is not as sharp? The intern came back and told me, the patient says he's having a lot of glare, having a lot of doubling. The letters are smearing into each other. And somewhere along the line, he's caught on that this patient is likely suffering from aberration. So we went in, and before I could even look at the lenses, really before I could even introduce myself, the patient showed me this photo. Said, this is what my vision looks like. Clearly, you can see this patient is suffering from a lot of glare, streaking. So more formally, aberrations are purely defined as a deviation from a point-to-point focus of a light, of an image of a light caused by typically a lens or a series of lenses, can be also caused by a mirror. We describe this best using a point spread function. What that means is if we take a point of light, shine it through a refractive system, an optical system, we measure how that point of light emerges from that optical system and compare. If we have a perfect optical system, has no aberrations at all, on the other side, you'll see just a regular point of light. This is theoretical in nature. This doesn't exist outside of pretty much algorithm demonstration purposes. A true optic system with aberrations present is going to result in more spread out right here. You'll see as you start to look for more aberrations tend to be greater in those higher or with corneal diseases such as keratoconus or corneal transplant. We'll get into why a little bit, but we describe aberrations most easily by breaking them apart individually into their Zernike polynomials. This chart may look familiar, but If it doesn't, we're going to walk through most of it so we can understand what exactly it is showing us. We'll start with the lower order aberrations, which are demonstrated here. The top two on this are called the first order aberrations. This is described as tilt. Tilt is unique that it actually doesn't describe the spreading out of a point of light. It's merely an altering of the destination of that point of light. So if we expect a point of light to go through an optic system and be shined or to be imaged at a specific point, that dot will be displaced in some direction due to tilt. We correct this all the time just using prism in our contact lenses or our glass. The second order aberrations are called sphere stigmatism. These are typically corrected with convex, concave, or cylindrical lenses, the same lenses that we put into our glasses and our contact lenses. And if you look at the point spread functions, it sort of makes sense how these work. So starting with spherical aberration or sphere aberration, you'll see that point of light has spread out into rings of defocus. This is what our lenses aim to focus for the retina. And if you're into myopia control, if you're looking into myopia control, you'll see that this seems to be similar to what myopic and hyperopic defocus looks like. Astigmatism, those patients are often going to complain of glare or streaking. And if you look at the point spread function, it looks exactly like that. You see that point of light is stretched in direction. Important to note that it is stretched in both directions from that point of light in the same line. The nice part about lower order aberrations is we're all super qualified to correct these on a day-to-day basis. They're easily corrected with glasses and or contact lenses. So we've nailed half of the aberrations if we're breaking them into discrete groups. But let's get into higher order. The higher order aberrations are described, are these that are highlighted in the rectangle here. We're going to focus on three primary higher order aberrations, as these are the ones that we can typically correct for with our modern optics. So the first being the third order aberrations, these being coma and trefoil. We're going to see these most in patients with ectatic diseases, such as keratoconus, globus, pellucid marginal degeneration. Trefoil, the point spread function looks like this. See that point of light spreading in three directions. It looks fairly symmetric as you go around, but influence of other aberrations distorts this. Coma, we really often think of the comet's tail. To me, it more looks like a boat going through water, leaving wake behind it. Whatever works best for you to remember it. But you can see why patients who have a lot of coma are going to be complaining of streaking. The fourth order aberration that we'll focus on, spherical aberration. And the point spread function looks very similar to the previous sphere aberration, but this is much more spread out. The rings are a little bit more faint and they do cover a wider distance. This is most commonly seen in patients after corneal refractive surgery and after corneal transplant. And we actually use it commonly in multifocal contact lens options. So these rings of defocus essentially serve to enhance the depth of field that a patient may experience while wearing. And if you look at the power profiles of just a few commonly fit contact lenses here, you'll see that they kind of match up with what's happening with the spherical aberration. So it is something we use pretty often. Higher order aberrations, these typically affect the quality of a patient's vision rather than lowering actually lines on a visual acuity chart. So I wouldn't expect a patient to drop multiple lines on a chart just based on their higher order aberrations, but they may suffer from reduced quality of vision. They may be happy with their vision. Fortunately, these can't be corrected, at least in the modern era, with glasses. Really, only specialty contact lenses are going to be addressing higher order. Another thing to point out is these are highly dependent on pupil size. So if I take this eye that's going from a more dilated state to a more constricted state, and I overlay just a point spread function It's not a perfect example, but it does demonstrate that as that pupil shrinks, you will be getting less higher order aberrations through that pupil. The patient will be experiencing less higher order aberrations. So a greater pupil size, greater aberrations, smaller pupil size, lower aberrations. This is the same reason that the pinhole effect works with lower order aberrations. We describe higher order aberrations using the root mean square. All this is we take all of the individual aberrations, square them, we add up the squares of all of them, and then we take the square root of that combined, the root mean square. Basically, what this tells you is an averaging of whether the patient is likely to be symptomatic or likely to not be symptomatic due to their higher order aberration. A higher RMS, root mean square score, is more higher order aberrations and thus more likely to be. And then lower is lower aberration. We use typically around a 0.4 micron cutoff, and it is important to note this is actually a distance from the retina, esoteric scaled score. You can see how this affects it. So if you look at the left-hand E, you see 0.21 microns, much more in focus, much more clear, and 0.56 on the right-hand side. That E is a little bit more out of focus. You can still see it, just not of the same quality. Important to note, if you are attempting to reduce higher order root square, you need to compare this value across the same pupil diameter. Typically in the literature, this is around 6. Just want to point out that we're able to read all of these E's. You can discern that there are 5 E's on this slide, but they are not of equal quality. So using letters really the best way to evaluate vision. Just a basic overview of how aberrations are measured. So we typically use a wavefront aberrometer. The way that this typically works, at least in this model, the Hartmann-Shack model, a light is shined into the eye. It is refracted by the ocular structures. That light reaches the retina. Some of it is absorbed, but some of it is reflected back. It is re-refracted through the ocular structures, then emerges from the eye. After emerging from the eye, it comes in contact with a micro lenslet array, which focuses the light onto a grid. This grid is programmed to match up with a perfect optical system. So if there were no aberrations in place, every single point of light would match up with every point on. If they don't match up, the device detects that difference and then runs an algorithm across all of the differences across that whole grid, and then spits out a patient's higher order aberration. The science behind it is very convoluted, but for simplicity, you take the scan and get a value of individual aberrations. This is what one of those scans may look like. This is the OPD device that we do have at the SUNY College of Optometry. This is a good way to screen patients for if they are experiencing elevated higher order aberration or if there may be another cause. So is this patient that we took the scan on just picky, or are they suffering from elevated higher order aberration? And as you look across this chart, you're probably trying to find where. You're looking for what might be caught, what number am I looking for to tell me is this patient suffering? And we hone in here. These are our higher order aberration values. And we hone in here. This is our higher order root mean square. So this patient with 0.118 and 0.06 is very unlikely to be suffering from higher order, maybe other causes if complaining of visual distress. Just to demonstrate another patient, so this patient, higher order aberrations of 0.625 and 0.842. This patient is much more likely to be suffering from higher order aberrations. I would consider this a good explanation of why they may be experiencing poor vision. I just want to show a couple different demonstrations of how this concept can affect patients' vision. So if we take a model eye, if it matches up with every single measurement on this scale, and all of the surfaces are perfectly transparent and all of them are perfectly refractive, we would see this visual acuity chart very, very well. All the way down to the bottom, going to be crystal clear. And even the bottom letters are going to be really easy to read. This patient, if we took them and dropped them into a car driving through Times Square, they experience vision like this. They're going to have really good quality of vision. They're going to be able to see around them and drive safely. They're going to be able to read the license plate in front of them, read which street they're going to be turning onto, read this guy's sign over on the right-hand side. They'll be able to see very, very well. Now, let's take a patient with higher order aberration due to uncorrected keratoconus. This is actually lower and higher order. If you look at that visual acuity chart, you might be able to read a little bit down that chart. I can definitely make out a K right here, but even the top row is really, really blurry, and I definitely don't feel great about my odds of seeing very well this eye. If we drop this patient into Times Square behind the wheel of a car, I don't think they're going to feel safe getting home. They really can't even make out the car in front of them, let alone a license plate. They don't know if a patient's going to, or if a pedestrian is going to walk in front of their car. This patient is definitely going to suffer as they navigate through life. And they may not know anything's wrong with their vision. They may not know not how everyone sees. They may just go through life as is. But let's say they come in for an eye exam, fit them with glasses. We get their visual acuity, let's say to a nice 2040, 2030. Looking at this visual acuity chart, I can pretty comfortably read this DVCHG with a little guessing. And if I'm a nice optometrist, I might give them that line of acuity and they may be safe to drive. But let's take them and put them behind the wheel of a car. It's maybe okay if in a familiar place and they know where they're going. There's not too many other cars around. But in the middle of Times Square, the patient is just not going to be safe navigating. They're not going to be able to see where they're going. They're going to see things happening in front of them or things happening around them. Definitely not going to feel safe. This was my Uber driver and I was trying to get home. We have to have some way of doing better. You might have caught on that we do. We have contact lenses. This is why we fit contact lenses for these patients. Not only does this correct their lower order aberration, typical prescription, but it also corrects their higher order aberration. So let's take this patient in a scleral. They can read that chart pretty comfortably, pretty far down. Definitely going to be able to drive. They're definitely going to be cleared to drive. Definitely going to be happier with their improved vision. Put them behind the car. You definitely can see a lot more. You can see around you. You might be able to make out the license plate. You'll definitely see if someone comes in front of you, but it's still not perfect. Still not great vision. For some patients, this may be enough. For some patients, this may be enough for them to get around day-to-day life. Especially in New York City, we have a lot of patients that rely on public transportation to navigate their world. They work jobs where they don't need to see very fine print. They typically stay within their own neighborhood because they're safe and don't have to worry about getting lost. But they can live and they can get around just fine. They may be happy, but there is a chance that they may not. This may be something that bothers them. So, I have to get into or how we can correct their higher order. So, important thing to point out that aberrations can arise from many different ocular structures. Cornea is going to be the most contributory structure if there is irregularity on it, but there are other. So starting at the cornea, we have our obvious keratoconus. Other things like corneal edema or a corneal transplant can also increase higher order. If we move backward in the eye, things like lenticonus, similar to keratoconus, but in the natural lens, can affect higher order aberration. As I said before, pupil size is going to be important factor in determining level of aberrations that enter the eye. And then things like cataracts. Different cataracts can cause different aberrations that a patient may struggle with. A little bit further back, we have things like floaters, which make a little bit more sense than asteroid hyalosis. Floaters being that translucent structure, it makes sense why they might bend light. But asteroid hyalosis, many of us learn that patients are often asymptomatic of asteroid. But the literature shows that asteroid hyalosis can actually be a cause of elevated higher order aberrations. And then further back still, anything that distorts the retina, so like a staphyloma or a sclerobuckle, instead of moving the way that light is refracted, we've moved the surface that it's being refracted on, still affects the higher order experience. Something to keep in mind. So these are our main causes. The cornea is obviously going to be the most important cause, and this is based on difference between the indices of refraction between the surrounding air and the front of the eye being the greatest, that any light that is refracted at that structure is amplified as compared to the rest of the eye where the indices of refraction are. And there are other causes. This is not an exhaustive list. I just a few of the different causes. So we take our measurement and we get a specific value. And it's important to know that we cannot distinguish the individual source of the aberration. Make assumptions that the cornea and the keratoconus are going to be a greater cause, but we cannot say for certain that it is wholly due to that keratoconus. Another important thing, if we put a contact lens on, it becomes part of this optical system. The machine does not know that you placed a contact lens on the eye. It really knows that light is being bent differently. And so we can use this to our advantage through things like wave front guided optics inside contact lenses. So I wanted to walk through a couple cases. This first one is a 44-year-old female. She's coming in for scleral lens fitting. She does have a history of pellucid marginal degeneration, and then she had a penetrating keratoplasty, a corneal transplant on the right eye. She's come to multiple follow-up visits, multiple revisions, wearing only her left lens. She says she's unable to tolerate the right lens. When we finally get her to put the lens on, she's best corrected visual acuity in the right eye to 25 and the left eye is that one line of difference enough for this patient to be unable to tolerate the scleral lens. Well, take a look at her topographies. So first off, this is the eye with the PKP, the penetrating keratoplasty. The topography of a PKP is going to look very irregular because of the healing process that patients go through. The donor graft is stitched into the host tissue. At that junction, there are sutures which eventually scar down. That scarring cracks, which causes irregularity across the surface of that cornea and thus causes irregular astigmatism. We do typically see a thicker pachymetry value due to this graft tissue, a bit thicker. But it is important to note that this changes over time because the sutures that are embedded may need to be removed and likely will be removed throughout the life of the graft. And scar tissue may change as both sutures are removed and the cornea continues to heal. And so you may have sort of a moving target caring for penetrating keratoplasty patients as their cornea is constantly changing. Looking at her left eye, she has more of a traditional pellucid marginal degeneration appearance. Got that crab claw or kissing doves pattern on the axial map. Crab claw. And she's got these areas of elevation that is more peripheral, inferior temporal for her, that is correlated on the front and back surface of the cornea, which is classic for pellucid marginal degeneration. You get the thinning superior to the protrusion in pellucid margin. Be a little bit more matched up, that thinning being at the same place So why doesn't this patient wear the lens? She's 2025 plus in that right eye, and I just don't believe that a few lines on 20 or a few letters on the 2020 line is enough for her not to. So she tells us the letters appear ghosted and smeared. She just says she'd rather ignore the right eye's vision than deal with that blur. So we made multiple revisions to her lens. And like Mr. Bean here, we're going back and forth and back and forth. We're going plus 50 sphere, minus 50 sphere, plus 50 sphere, minus 50 sphere. She always seems to be bouncing between refractive options, and she promises that it's better when we trial frame it, but then once we get the lens in, she's not happy. And then we have to order another one. He does say that when we tried an older lens that had a flatter central base curve, he says it's a little bit better. The shadowing is a little bit less. But then once we put it into a lens with her actual prescription, no improvement. She's exactly the same. So at some point I said, let's check. Lo and behold, tells a lot. So her higher order root mean square on the right eye was 0.509 microns, and on the left eye, 0.127. So she's above that 0.40 micron symptomatic screening level. So it's pretty clear that her aberrations are contributing to this discomfort in the lens. Like we saw, her vision is about the same in this eye as the other eye. She's not happy with the quality of vision. So we let her know, and kind of to our surprise, she said she was happy. Just wanted to know that there was a physical cause. She wanted to make sure that her corneal graft was still okay, causing problems. And she decided, you know what, I don't want to do anything about it. I'm just happy to know that I'm not crazy, and this is just part of why my eye is seeing this way. So a kind of bittersweet ending. Should say case two. A 33-year-old male presents for a contact lens fitting on the left eye only. Of note, he came in sunglasses, said due to severe light sensitivity. He had suffered a corneal laceration in the left eye, and there were 3 embedded sutures on that eye when we examined his uncorrected vision. He's getting around fine with the right eye with 20/25 plus, and the left eye 20/70. For a laceration, not too bad without anything. He claims to have no prior ocular history, but like I said, we took a look at the eye. We saw the laceration scar, we saw sutures, and we saw stromal thinning, both eyes. He denies that anything happened to the right eye, but stromal thinning is a little interesting. So, scratching my head a little bit, we did what we kind of always do, contact lens service. I took a topography, and this is the left eye. This is the eye with the trauma. So if we look at his topography, you can see a posterior elevation semi-correlating with the laceration scar. That is actually his eye, and it's a little hard to see, but here is the scar, and then it runs across here. It's a pretty, here's the scar, and it runs laterally here. Pretty consistent with the posterior elevation. It actually matches up pretty flawlessly. He also has an anterior elevation here, which is interestingly away from the posterior elevation. Also has fairly steep Ks in the center, along with a little bit of thinning. Granted, this eye has been through a lot, so I'm not going to hold it against him. It may just be a result of the ocular. But we never do topography on one eye. Look at the right. Looking at the right eye, we see symmetrical axial map, inferior steepening, a 51.2 K value there. We see posterior and anterior elevations that seem to match up, along with relative thinning in the pachymetry. He denies that anything has happened to this right eye. Oh, is it possible that this patient had keratoconus or the injury? Not really the point of the talk. thought it was interesting. But we decided to put him in scleral lens just in the left eye. His vision did improve. He got down to 20/20 in that left eye. But he always said he sees two very clear lines on top of each other. So, again, got kind of that interesting appearance to his topography. We performed an over-refraction and found a lot more plus. There's a chance that he was over-minused in his first lens. I don't buy that all of this plus was necessary to get him to 20/20, but I think a lot of it kind of magnified things and reduced doubling by having more overlap between the two sets of. But once we put it in the lens, same thing. It's still double. See two lines, one on top of the other. We did a spherocylindrical over refraction. We said uncorrected astigmatism. One thing that's important when checking for sphere, when you see SIL in an over refraction, you want to check if the lens is flexing on the. We did topography over the lens, and looking at the tangential map here, a uniform green means that there is no significant flexure. We can assume that this uncorrected astigmatism is actually lenticular or arising from some other part of the corrective structure. So we put that into the lens and we lost a couple lines of acuity. He changed to Snellen. Still reports the doubling of the images. So we went back to the spherical lens. He says he sees better with it, but he still notices doubling. So now what? What do we do now? Well, we know that it improved his vision. We know that he has good usable vision. Significant damage was done. Really the possible vision that he can attain after the trauma, but he wasn't happy. And this is based on his higher order aberrations. That laceration scar and capacity from it and the elevation differences due to it caused elevated HOAs. Just was not happy wearing the lens. He did decide, you know what, let me just wear it. Let me try to get used to it. Just currently trying to actually adapt to aberration. See him back and see how future. My last case is a 74-year-old female. She's presenting for a scleral lens fitting. She has her habitual scleral lenses, and she is fairly content with them. Her best corrected vision in these lenses is 20/40 in both eyes. The or from the topography maps is keratin. She says she has cloudy vision, and it feels like by the end of the day, she's seeing double with each eye individually. When she covers each eye individually, say. She says that she feels that the quality of her vision is dramatically degraded. And she was pretty savvy. She came to us knowing that higher order aberrations were probably the cause of visual complaints. So she was very interested in how to address these and reduce higher order. So we decided to measure, and turns out she was right. The right eye had 0.481 microns higher order aberration, root mean square, and then the left eye had 0.8. Interestingly enough, she complained more about her left eye's vision, primarily when she was driving, which we attribute to driving on the left side of the road. The headlights on the left side are going to be brighter. That's where so we think that she's just noticing it more because using it more, getting more light glare on that side just because she's getting more light. So she was dead set on fixing this, and she said, let's start fitting wavefront guided scleral optics. So I decided to do that. But how do we go about doing that? Well, we really need to choose our lens carefully if we're going to fit wavefront guided contact lens. Our ideal lens really is going to be a scleral. Reason being, scleral lens has a rigid, regular front surface. This allows for consistent correction that isn't going to modify with blink or hydration, and it will essentially provide the same level of correction throughout the day. Secondly, you need a lens that is translationally stable on eye. So any soft lens, any GP, any hybrid that is fit well will move on the eye. This movement causes those highly customized wavefront guided optics to move as well. And the patient may notice that their vision is degraded with that movement. This has also been found through testing. Wavefront guided optics have been put on corneal GPs, hybrids, and soft lenses, and they've all shown less success than parts. Lastly, kind of going along with the prior, scleral lenses are rotationally stable on eye. This isn't like a soft toric lens where every time they blink, that marker's going to kick. It's a change in the. We need a well-fitted scleral that is not going to spin so that that aberration correction is staying in the same place. So how do we actually go about it? The process is actually very similar to regular scleral lenses, but we need to place a lot more focus on stability on the eye. So the main way to do that, the easiest way to do that is to use toric or quadrant specific optics to really hone in to make sure that you're getting a kind of a lock and key fit on that sclera. If you're finding that that's just not working and your lens is rotating at all or it's translating at all, you may need to opt for a higher level of scleral fitting. The first being a scan-based approach. So that is similar to the picture on the top middle here. This is where a scan is taken over the whole eye, including the sclera. That scan is then uploaded and then a digital mock-up of a lens is created that matches up fairly one-to-one with this ocular tissue. A lens is then cut on a lathe using this digitally constructed lens, and it matches up fairly well with the ocular structure. If this doesn't work, or you know you have a very hard to fit eye, you may need to opt for an impression-based contact lens, like the one you see on the right hand here. This is the iPrint probe technology. Essentially, the blue goo is placed in the world's smallest bikini glass, which is then placed onto the eye and allowed to set. After it is set onto the eye, it is then removed. You can see here, you have pretty much a one-to-one mock-up of the patient's actual eye. Interesting thing of note, you don't actually use anesthetic for this. And when I had my eye impressed, I saw why. It doesn't cause a lot of pain, doesn't cause a lot of discomfort. It's pretty quick. Works out really well. This impression is sent directly to the lab, which is scanned into a software system, and then a digital lens is designed off of this, which can be modified further to take extra pressure off tubes or to vault over filtering blebs a little bit better so that you're not putting pressure on delicate structure. The other thing to focus on is the best possible overrefraction. Patients may compensate for their higher order aberrations through different means. They may take more minus because it constricts certain aberration measurements. It may take more plus because it brings things together through overlapping blur circles, or they may take astigmatism because that streaking may counteract the streaking they're already experiencing. So really trying to hone in on what their eye actually needs in terms of refractive error is going to be extremely helpful when fitting wavefront guided scleral lenses. How do we measure this? So, like I said before, when you put a contact lens on the eye, it does change the higher order aberration measurement. So, you have to have the best fit lens that you can, and then you speak with your consultant. They send you a duplicate lens with dots all over it. So you can see dot here, couple dots down here. This is to track the orientation of that lens when on the eye. These dots are actually called fiducials. Dots. That scan is then sent to your consultant, which will use that to guide the placement of the wavefront guided optics. There is some debate in the field over whether to dark adapt or to dilate patients before taking the scan. We do want a greater pupil size because we want to during the extent of a patient's aberrations, so that they're not suffering when they're in a dark condition. So dilation really offers the best benefit in terms of making sure you have a maximum pupil size. However, in order to dilate, you have to take the lens off. Then you have to still the drops, wait a couple minutes, put the lens back on. In that time, you lose the settled lens. So the lens will not be fully settled in time for the patient to still have a remaining dilation. Use a very strong dilating drop. The counterpart is dark adaptation. You don't get as big of a pupil size, but how often are patients actually reaching maximal? Benefit of dark adaptation is you can dispense the lens, you even dispense it without an appointment, see the patient the next day, they'll be wearing the lens, theoretically for 4, 5, 8 hours. The lens is going to be fully settled. Throw them in a dark room, let them sit, pupils will get nice and wide, take your scans. You may not have the maximum pupil, but you have a big enough one to work with, and you have a fully settled. So I prefer to do dark adaptation. I encourage you, if you start fitting wavefront guided sclerals, to play with both and see which one you seem to works better for your exam flow and which better outcome. But after you take this scan, you need to send the data to the lab. So there are a couple ways of sending it. One is an integrated system, and one is essentially looking at the individual aberration. So regardless, the lab receives that data, then uses it to guide the creation of a custom wavefront guided power profile, which is then placed into the lens. Let's see here. The best analog for this is actually noise canceling headphones. So if you think of the way noise canceling headphones work, they're hearing the world around you through a microphone. If they hear a sound that will go through from outside the headphone through the headphone into your ear, they will play an equal and opposite sound to that, essentially equal and opposite amplitude, which will, through destructive interference, will come out to a lower wavefront and will have lower amplitude waveform, which will cause less disturbance to the listener. Similarly, with wavefront guided lenses, if you know specific wavefront power profile is going to be induced by a patient's eyeball, you can place that to the lens in an equal and opposite fashion so that after it goes through both, you get a more minimally affected beam of light that will reach the retina, of better quality of vision because there'll be less disruption. So just to review, we have our lens here with our fiducials or our dots. That lens is placed on the eye. We need a photo of that is sent off to the lab. We take a scan. This is Ovitz machine integrated systems that measures aberrations, everything. All of this together is sent to your consultant. They create a front guided lens. So this photo on the left is showing the higher order aberration measurement of in a traditional scleral lens and a regular scleral lens. If you look at the actual lens power profile, this is reversed from this. So all of these hotspots in the wearable lens is then reversed in the wavefront guided power profile. This serves that when you add these two together, you get this more uniform higher order aberration. So this, yes, there's this yellow coming up and a little bit of blue, but the yellows are much less hot and the blues are much less cool than the initial power profile. So this patient is likely to experience much improved vision from this correction mode. So if I haven't convinced you, this is a lot of work. So you may be asking, why go through all this? What is this actually going to do for my patients? Surely it can't be that good. Well, it's in the numbers. So consistently in the literature, we found a reduction of about 40 to 60%. Most studies have found a 1 to 2 line improvement in visual acuity. Would never promise a patient that, but there is a chance that they can get 1 to 2 line improvement in visual acuity. I like to call it a bonus if they do attain it, but I would never ever. And then in one study that was done at the Cornea Laser Eye Institute with Dr. John Gellies, all patients but one in that cohort, somewhere around 20 patients, preferred the wavefront guided sclerals as compared to their standard scleral lenses that they had been wearing. There is, looking at the data, there's a likelihood that that one patient who preferred the traditional lens preferred it because the wavefront guided lens reduced her spherical aberration, which then reduced her ability to see up close. By reducing that, we reduced her depth of field, and she then lost her ability to um, read her phone or things like that, and started needing readers more. So that she may have preferred the standard scleral lens because we made her suddenly presbyopic. But this technology has been around for a long time. So 2002 was when this was first filed, and then first approved or issued in 2005. It's 20 years ago. The first publication really in 2013, and they found about the same reduction of about 43 to 66% in total higher order aberration. They again found that 1 to 2 lines visual improvement in the wavefront guided lenses, but we really haven't seen a lot of wavefront guided optics in sclerals until recently. It wasn't really until 2020 that this was easy for the everyday practitioner to do outside of a research setting. So, why is that? It's really because of integrated systems. These fully integrated systems help expedite the process, help simplify the process, and help improve outcomes. The way we do it at SUNY, we don't have an integrated. So I have, when fitting this lens, I have to take a scan, or I have to, fit a lens the best I can, multiple revisions to get that perfect lens. I get the duplicate lens with the fiducials, with the dots. I then have to photograph that on a photography instrument or on slit lamp camera. I have to take that and then HIPAA compliant. I have to send it to a consultant in a HIPAA compliant way. I then have to take a higher order aberration measurement. Using that higher order aberration measurement, I have to go through the system of that instrument to find the individual Zernike polynomials, which are then I can send over to the consultant. Again, in a HIPAA compliant way. And that requires a lot of coordination. Essentially, what that means is that I have to work with one specific consultant at one specific company at a time, because if too many cooks get in the kitchen, it spoils the broth. The benefit of this integrated system is your photo, your lens parameters, your aberration measurements are all stored in one system and sent for HIPAA compliant means to the lab that you're with. It's all packaged as one, so whoever the consultant is that is working on it can see everything all at the same time. Also gives you super consistent results because you have one singular aberrometer taking these measurements. So it's easy to compare across scans. Also, this gives you a good way of tracking this patient over time in a very simplistic way. And if you change the lens fit or you change the prescription in the lens, you can see how that affects the rest of the lens data. These optics are highly, highly customized to this patient's individual. If you take a look at these bottom two scans, you can see that the spherical traditional scleral lens on the left has a very prolate appearance where the center is more down from there. You have a kind of a uniform steepening or flattening across that surface of the lens. When you look at the higher aberration lens, you can see much more uniqueness in that. You see a hot here, you see this cool band, you see green coming up. It's very customized. It's very unique. It's easy for the lab to replicate, but it isn't something that we'd be able to predict. So you really need to take the measurements in order to create this type of lens. So just as a reminder, higher order aberrations for a patient with just rigid contact lenses with scleral lenses, they may see the chart like the one on the right. But I want to point out how wavefront guided sclerals can. So you look here, you can see the traditional scleral lens, higher order aberration heat map. You see hot with cool lows. The wavefront guided scleral lens, you can see a much more uniform pattern across the lens here, across the heat map, which shows a much lower root mean square. Still significant at point, but it's a reduction from 1.4. And just the uniformness of this map may be enough for this patient to be, even though we would expect them to be significant. The chart is going to look a lot clearer for this patient. It's still not perfect, but they can get pretty far down and they can make out the letters without having to feel like they're guessing at every single. We take the same patient and we put them in a car, Times Square. This is how they'll see. It's not the best, it's not perfect, but it's way better than it was before. They can see the car, they can see the license plate in front of them. They'll definitely see if a pedestrian walks in front of them. They can definitely see where they're going. They're going to be a lot safer navigating through this. This is how they saw in their rigid, regular contact, traditional lenses. And if you don't believe it's that different, I put them side by side with the wavefront guided on the left, regular scleral. You can see how different these are. You can see how much less smearing, how much less doubling there is with wavefront guided optics. This patient is much more likely to feel safe about their regular day, and they're much more likely to be happy with their everyday vision. So key takeaways from this, topography really can reveal a lot of the source of a patient's visual complaints, beyond just the diagnosis of keratoconus. The cornea is the most likely contributor to higher order aberrations that a patient may be suffering. And just taking a topography may reveal why a patient may be experiencing the higher order aberration symptom. If you're in doubt, consider just taking a scan. If you have a wavefront aberrometer in your office, it may be worth just looking to see if this patient may be suffering from higher order aberrations. And then lastly, wavefront guided sclerals they are a great option. They can't optimize vision, and they're not as far into the future as we thought. These are routinely being fit in offices around the world. We're doing them here at SUNY. The benefit of upgrades to systems and upgrades to the measurements that we get, more lenses being available, is that more patients can benefit from this. So it's worth looking into offering this for your patients, really improve their vision. With that, this has been I Can Read the Line, but It's Still Blurry, Understanding Vision Through Aberrometry. Thank you so much.